When I first got out, 6 months, I couldn't find a job.
I spent a year looking for a job. A year.
When they see the Marine Corps on my resume, their mind goes off into
mindless drone.
Brainwashed.
Uneducated.
They don't want you diving under a desk if someone drops something.
Hey, you're a Marine. Why don't you mop this floor?
You're in the military. Perfect. We have a security position. It's $9 an hour. You'll love it because you get to hold a gun again.
We're not looking for special handouts. Just a little bit of a nudge in the right direction.
Give me a chance. Let me prove myself.
I cannot tell you how many times I heard this. Thank you for your service. That's always appreciated, and it never gets old. It never gets old. Of course, a job's better.
Give them a chance. It's all about adapting and doing more with less in the military. So, just give them a chance.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. And as the daughter of a veteran, I mean, truly thank you for your service, though I recognize, especially in light of your endowment and the infomercial we just saw, that it does take more than that, which is why we're here, to learn more about what we can know and what we can do. Before we actually talk about the endowment, General, I'd love for you to unpack a few of the issues that American veterans come home to. And it's not just a lack of awareness or an apathy, but also sometimes there's stigma and misperceptions as to what a vet can provide in the American workplace. Can you unpack some of those, please?
Sure. Well, I think that first and foremost, I've been around long enough I'm a Vietnam War veteran, and so I know what it's like to come home and not be appreciated. The veterans today don't have to face that. What we're seeing today is a lot of veterans who, particularly in the age 20 to 24, who have kind of fallen through the crack and are having a hard time connecting to employers, prospective employers, and how to present themselves in a way that makes it attractive for employers to hire them. There's also a stigma. The stigma of the Vietnam vet is well documented, but this one is about a title of post-traumatic stress that is a kind of a modern term for what we used to call in World War II combat fatigue. But it is a stigma that causes a lot of prospective employers to say, well, maybe not, stress is in all of our lives. There are many more people in this country who survive car accidents that have post-traumatic stress from just that incident. So it's not a military problem, it's a social problem, it's a medical problem. It's manageable, it's treatable, and prospective employers shouldn't shy away from that for one reason alone. Another reason employers are unwilling to take a chance on a veteran is, for instance, if the veteran is still on reserve duty, and you never know when the next deployment might come up. So there are a lot of ways for employers to kind of not deal with it, but in the main, this is a manageable situation, and organizations like Code of Conduct, Endowment are just doing great things. So. We just need to figure out how we marry up the public sector and the private sector. We'll talk a lot about employers today, but the public sector has responsibilities as well, and that is to make sure that people who serve honorably for their country go back into society fully equipped with a resume, with a lot of counseling and mentorship, and a plan by which they're going to reintegrate. But again, this is a problem that's fairly localized around the 20 to 24-year-olds.
Right. When we're looking at the concept of the young American vet, Brian, it's extremely important because the idea of helping them come up with a game plan is extremely crucial because of their age. Why this specific target demographic?
Obviously, like you mentioned, they're young, number one. Two, when you think about it, and I'll pose this question to the audience, how many wealthy families do you know whose children enlisted in the military, especially in the last decade or so when we were involved in 2 wars? Not many, right? Most of the men and women who enlist in the armed forces, they come from more difficult backgrounds. They weren't born on second and third base. Sometimes they weren't even born in the dugout. And so for them, it's not that they don't have skills. They have tremendous skills. They've got all kinds of intangibles, but they've never had anybody in their life who is necessarily successful at writing a resume or interviewing at a job. They don't have a personal network back in their hometown of people who work in major corporations and big employers. So this is a very foreign field to them. And the culture of the military, it's unlike any other job. It's your life. It's your entire community. It's not just where you go to work every day and then you go home. So when you leave the military and then go into a new job or start searching for jobs, it's so different to you. And that's the hard part. They don't know the rules of the road. They don't know how to communicate their value to a prospective employer in terms that they'll understand. Because in the military, we got a language that's all our own. We have acronyms out the wazoo, I mean, more than you can imagine. And so first time somebody asked me, well, what can you do for a company? Well, I'm an infantry officer, I'm going to look at the MPCO, I'm going to look at the SMEAC, and I'm throwing all these acronyms out there. People don't understand that. And so what we try to do at Hire Heroes USA is help these service members, one, identify what their skills and certifications are, where and what geographic areas they would like to work, who in those areas hire people like them, and then how to communicate their value to a prospective employer. Not just on a resume, in a phone interview, utilize LinkedIn to expand their network, how to utilize all the tools around them to include their own alumni system in the military to then find not just a job, but the right job.
Right, what he just said, Dan, is the key to what this endowment and the organization it supports is doing. It's not a lack of capacity, it's a disconnect between the private and public sector. I'm sure the first time someone asks a veteran these questions, there might be jargon that is not understood, but with the right tools, the second time, knock it out of the park.
Yeah, absolutely, Nancy, and thanks so much for having us here. There is a disconnect. There's a fundamental disconnect. I like to think of it economically between supply and demand. The supply of vets who are ready to go into jobs and the demand for them from employers. And, in any other realm, we call that a market inefficiency. Supply is not meeting demand. The vets have the skills, our transitioning service members have the skills to make their mark in the corporate world and with other employers, but they don't, as Brian described, necessarily know how to communicate that. Businesses, on the other hand, have trouble attracting them, hiring them, actually, pulling the trigger and saying yes, and ultimately retaining them. And there's a number of simple things they can do to close that gap as well. So what the endowment really focuses on is making sure our veterans are job ready. They're by supporting organizations like Brian's, like Hire Heroes USA, one of the best organizations in the country for efficiently putting vets in jobs. We're able to close the gap on that side. And then also by helping employers understand the value vets bring to the workplace, that also closes the gap. And by them understanding that, hey, it's not a burden by hiring a vet, it's a benefit, actually. We know it's been proven by studies of millions of Fortune 500 employees that veterans make above average employees in terms of productivity and retention. So there's a real business case for hiring them as well. Unfortunately, that message hasn't deeply penetrated, and part of our charter is to get that out there too.
And the penetration that you've achieved so far is phenomenal. We're looking at unprecedented numbers. When we're looking at the types of jobs, the types of meaningful jobs, general, that these individuals who have been fighting for our country get to come back home to. 93% full-time, good salary rates, retention for 6 months. What's the difference between these jobs and some of the jobs individuals were mentioning in the video prior to our conversation, like $9 an hour security jobs? What's the difference between the types of jobs that the endowment facilitates versus general jobs that people see vets as being perfect for, quote unquote?
Well, the endowment facilitates organizations that are actually finding the jobs. We have we have metrics that we apply to the organizations that go out and do the jobs. And if they don't place the veterans, then at the end of the year we review their performance, and they may not get funded for the following year. So it's a pretty high standard, but we feel sure that the money that's being invested is going to the right place, is actually producing something, and not just disappearing into overhead. And Dan can probably give you a little bit more.
On the note of overhead, it's important to note how lean the endowment is. And when we're looking at placement, only $900 to place
right.
an individual versus, let's put that into perspective.
Absolutely. So we know from a government accounting office study that the government spends roughly $3,000 to place a veteran into a job. We don't know what the quality of those jobs are, but we know that $3,000 tends to equal a veteran job. The organizations we fund, like Hire Heroes USA, Corporate America Supports You, and our 6 other grantees, average about $900 per placement. So about 1/3 the cost of government efforts. Plus, as the general was saying, we're measuring not just the number of jobs, but the quality of the jobs. We're measuring from every quarter from each of these nonprofits what % of those jobs are full-time work, because underemployment is a problem in this country. At 6 months down the road, how many of these vets are still in those jobs? Average starting salary. So we're really keeping a tight bead on how good these jobs are. And we don't want just jobs, we want careers. We want vets employed in meaningful employment that will lead to things, that won't result in them being out of a job a year later. And Brian actually had a great comment earlier today when we were talking. I'll let you say it directly, but a job is truly the best medicine, because any other problem most vets are facing, meaningful employment can either make that problem go away or make it a lot easier to deal with. Because a job means you can put a roof over your head. It often means you have access to good health care. It means you're connecting with other people. And that ultimately addresses bigger problems we hear about, like the high suicide rate amongst veterans.
Especially, Brian, in light of what you said earlier, and we're looking at the demographics of individual who, in the age that they're entering the military, when we're looking at the concept of meaningful work. Also, it was mentioned, Dan said, look, these are jobs that are not just part-time, they're not underemployment, and they have high retention rates. We're looking at nearly 90% of veterans being kept on 6 months and beyond. I mean, what difference does this make, having these types of meaningful jobs versus these piecemeal operations that generally exist?
Well, it's quality of life. You saw in the video what happens when people are underemployed, and it's not just veterans, it's anybody in the crowd. A lot of times we as people assign our own value, our own self-esteem is based on what we do for a living. And so if you're underemployed and you're doing something that you are massively overqualified for, you're not going to assign yourself a high value. And I've got a phrase that I use towards veterans, that busy minds don't wander to dark places. And Hollywood has made it seem like every single person that's served in combat has just massive mental health problems and that we could snap off at any time. And it's just not true. They've greatly over-exaggerated the issue. The percentage of people in this building that are suffering from some kind of mental health problem in getting help, whether it be medication or seeing someone, is a higher percentage of people than you could take a military unit of the same quantity. And so it's a farce what's being sold to you out of Hollywood. But there are things that combat service members do endure, like combat stress, like post-traumatic stress, and we do have a high suicide rate. You just don't see that happen when you get a veteran who's gainfully employed and reintegrated into society and a member of the community. You see that when someone has a poor transition out of the military back into the civilian populace, they can't find a job. Their self-esteem is plummeting because they can't pay their bills. They used to have massive responsibility in the military. They used to have people that relied on them, people that they led, and now they're here and nobody's willing to give them a chance on their team. We've all felt that before. We've all been the last person picked to be on a team at some point in our life. That's what you're made to feel like. After everything you've endured overseas, 3 or 4 tours in Afghanistan or Iraq, now you can't manage a car wash. And so that's where you see some of the bigger problems come, and that's where we try to come in and help them in this transition. If in that initial transition, they're 9 months before they get out of the military and their first 9 months out, they can find a job that challenges them, that's right for their skills, that they're qualified for, but that also has places for advancement, all these other problems go away. They're getting a shot at the American dream that they enlisted to serve for.
And on the note of getting that job, let's flip scripts to what's working in general. There are companies that the endowment is working with and that the companies through the endowment is working with that are making a difference. They're making a commitment and dedicating themselves to making sure they give veterans opportunities. Could you please share some of those companies?
Well, sure. Starbucks is one. Walmart is another. If you look at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, they have a wonderful program designed to provide jobs for veterans. There's, I don't know, Dan, give me a few others.
Sure. Swift Transportation hired thousands of veterans last year, one of the biggest Teamster or transportation-focused companies in the country. The 100,000 Jobs Initiative run by
Chase.
JP Morgan Chase, that there's almost 200 companies signed up to that. That gets back to this other issue of the jobs are there. It's just getting the vets to the jobs and then getting them through the wickets, because a simple examination of the problem says, oh, we just have to make recruiters aware where the veterans are and the problem solved. And that's not how it happens, because recruiters aren't the ones who ultimately hire people. It's hiring managers, it's line managers in the companies who are trying to fill holes in their ranks. So we got to get the understanding of the value vets bring to companies and organizations down to that level, to the people who are making hiring decisions. When they understand that, when they understand this is a benefit, not a burden, we're going to really start solving this problem. And there are companies like Starbucks, for instance, and others the General mentioned that are really making great inroads here.
And you actually have an unlikely ally. When we're looking at stereotypes and misperceptions, many individuals think that a military man is just used to taking orders or can't be creative. Jon Stewart, in his hiring processes, has been a huge boon to combating that stereotype.
That's right. So there's actually a long history of veterans who are incredibly creative. It's not something, it's a stereotype we're fighting that, military service members are automatons, like they can't create. I mean, Jimi Hendrix was a vet, for God's sakes. Clint Eastwood's a vet. There's Drew Carey's a vet. Rob Riggle's a vet. There's lots of really creative people out there, and there are companies that are, starting to realize this. And Jon Stewart's program, I think he's helped over 70 veterans, brought them on as interns or actually as full-time employees to work on that show. I think we'd argue that's a pretty great bastion of creativity. And I think he set a fine example. While the number's not huge overall, the example is. He's out there in the entertainment business showing that vets can be incredibly successful in the creative realm. J.J. Abrams with Bad Robot, they've done that as well. Some incredible work there. So I think we need more examples like that.
And on that note, General.
I was just going to add that we talk a lot about what the private sector should do, but I also believe that the public sector needs to do more. And that is each service and the Department of Defense needs to, in my view, recognize that it will take 6 months to train a young person who comes in from the civilian life to the military, but will take 2 weeks to separate them. And that's not enough. And I think the service separation programs, while they tend to address entire groups of people, by the hundreds sometimes in a separations program, what they need to do, I think, is to figure out a way to individualize it more so that an individual who served honorably and is electing to leave the service gets, for instance, a letter of recommendation from his commanding officer, written not in military English, but in plain English, that this is a really good guy and he can do X, Y, or Z, or she can do X, Y, and Z. And I would hire this person if I were a prospective employer. And try to humanize it and individualize it a little bit more, I think would go a long way, particularly for that younger group. And this is really what we're talking about, where the bigger problem is, 20 to 24, who are separated. And many times they're married and have families. And I can't imagine anything more stressful than walking off a base with wife and 2 kids and no job. That's traumatic stress. And to Brian's point, if you can fix that, you can solve a lot of this problem.
Is that in the pipeline for the work that you're doing with the endowment?
Well, it's what motivates me in my post-service life. As I said, I've been around a long time, and
yes.
I think it's a way to give back.
And is it also a learn by example? I think by showing how streamlined you can make this by being the umbrella organization for so many fantastic organizations, you can say, you know what? It's simple. It's easy. It makes a difference. It's cost effective. Are you seeing notice from our government, from the public sector?
Yeah, absolutely. Here's the sort of bewildering thing about the issue. There's 47,000 nonprofits out there claiming to serve veterans. And I think most of them are well-intentioned. Very, very few of them are well-run. And so for us, the biggest challenge we had out of the gates was finding the needle in the haystack, the great organizations like Hire Heroes USA that have been proven to get these results for the great jobs, ones that help families like the General described right out of the gates. In fact, no one in the country does it better than Hire Heroes USA in terms of getting to those transitioning service members while they're still on base, so they don't have that moment when they're coming off base for the last time with a family and no job. So that's really important. Our process has identified the organizations that can do this really well and do it cost effectively. But there's very few organizations in the country that really meet that standard. That, $900 cost per placement, good luck. It's a tough haul. We've been very fortunate partnering with Deloitte, who spends up to a week with each of these nonprofits, evaluating them, making sure they can deliver these kind of results now and in the future.
And that the deliverance of results lends to the seal of excellence that your organization has received.
It does, and it's called the seal of distinction. And, Dan hit a lot of great points. One thing to add from my perspective as someone who is running the organization is the feedback you get. Yes, you're being evaluated, but there's feedback. And Dan, in his position with this endowment, has used this position to coach organizations, to make them better, to improve their business techniques, to make them more lean. Because the bottom line is to take every one donated dollar and stretch it as far as you can to help as many service members and spouses as we can. That's our job. Our stakeholders are the people that donate money to Hire Heroes USA. We exist only to help service members and their spouses get jobs, period. Not anything else. Not have the best office space in every city we're in, not have massive overhead. And that's what the endowment has done, not only for the organizations they fund by making them better, but they've made other people try to get better to get that seal of distinction. They've made other big funders try to be more like them, to hold organizations accountable to their money and become better to be more like them. They've set a new standard in the space, which I love. When I took over running Hire Heroes USA, I hired one of my best friends who was also a Marine Corps infantry officer. We were really good in terms of standardization, operating procedures, leadership. We were awful at marketing and brand awareness. I didn't know any of this stuff. So how do you raise money? You could have the greatest program in the world and be the best at helping each individual service member, but if you can't tell anybody about it, you're never going to get anybody to donate to you. Well, luckily, there's an organization called the Call of Duty Endowment who comes in, they look around and say, wow, you're doing a great job. Here's money to grow. And we went from, I had 6 employees when the Call of Duty Endowment gave us our first $50,000 grant. We now have 60 in 7 locations nationwide. They fund over a third of our operations. So without them, without that growth, we would have never been able to showcase what our results are to bring on more funders and grow to where we're bringing over 200 service members and spouses into the program every single week now. Back when we first met, it was by the 10s and 20s.
I think that deserves a round of applause.
Thank you.
And we're looking at this in light, this is just a fraction of the $400 million in salaries that you've been able to get into the households of veterans. And we're also seeing, when I'm hearing Brian's story, General, we're also seeing a trickle down. In the same way that organizations are helping individual veterans with the language necessary to survive and to thrive in the workplace, Call of Duty Endowment is helping these organizations, often run by veterans, helping veterans get the language and tools they need to succeed, to help these individuals. It seems like it's just a wonderful full circle organization.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the question.
Well, there wasn't a question, but I welcomed you to jump off of that because it's exciting. It's something that, again, holds people to a standard, and the standard comes from somewhere, and obviously it came from your mind.
Yeah. It certainly does. I mean, I've always been attracted to doing something that helps the country be unified, and this is something that's a very unifying principle and good for everyone, good for the country, good for the individual citizens, and good for people who gave so much and sometimes seriously wounded to reestablish themselves in society.
And last question, and then we'll go to our audience for questions. I'm sure they have questions. When he mentioned seriously wounded, Dan, I think that's important. We see people who are amputees, who do have physical issues, sometimes mental issues. That does not mean they cannot be excellent employees. They cannot be excellent contributors to a workplace and to society at large, and we must remove that stigma from ourselves.
Sure. Well, the vast majority, and this is to Brian's earlier point, the vast majority of veterans are good to go. They're ready to enter the workplace. Some veterans have some challenges, be they physical or mental. Most of those challenges can be handled. it is really a very, very small number of veterans who are so challenged, have such high barriers to employment that they can't rejoin our society, right? But that's what you hear about. The fact of the matter is, as Brian said, in a workplace this size, there are people who have all kinds of challenges. It doesn't mean they can't be great employees and do a great job. And that's how we have to think about reintegrating veterans. It's not like, can they be reintegrated? What's the best way to do it? And so we try and force that issue. And we try to make it efficient by channeling resources to the best organizations.
I'd like to put in a plug for veterans with physical disabilities. A few years ago in the armed forces, not that long ago, if you became physically disabled, you couldn't re-enlist. You would have to leave the service. To their credit, the services have changed now, and they find other jobs, military jobs for people with physical disabilities. In the same manner, in the civilian sector, I think we should make sure that people understand that being wounded in combat or losing a limb doesn't make you less of a potential employee, and I think that's very important to point out.
Yeah, and just to put things in perspective, 2.5 million Americans have served in theater since 9/11. Less than 2,000 veterans have lost a limb since 9/11. So, it's an incredible, unimaginable sacrifice for most of us. But I just want to keep things in perspective that the veterans who are severely wounded physically are they deserve every bit of help they can get, but they are a relatively small part of the larger veteran population.
Perspective is something that each of you has given us today, and we welcome our audience to ask questions to learn more about the Call of Duty Endowment and the work that each of our panelists does.
So my question is how, on an everyday basis, just regular people can get involved and what we can do to help.
Want to start, Brian?
Sure, absolutely. A few ways. One is if you meet or a service member, went to high school and they're just recently getting out of the military. Maybe you see it on Facebook and they're coming back home. Go get a cup of coffee with them. Ask them what they're going to do. Engage with them. Don't look at them like they're so foreign to you that you couldn't understand. Don't watch American Sniper and then all of a sudden think that that's every transitioning service member getting out. Most jobs are landed through your own personal network. Over 50% of them, in fact, are inside jobs, as I like to call it. And one of the biggest challenges we have as service members when we get out of the military service is expanding our network and letting people know that, hey, this is who I am, this is my skill set, this is where I'm looking to work. If you happen to know anybody who hires people like me, let me know. And a lot of times when they re-engage with their areas and people like you, that's what ends up leading them to, one, realize what they want to do, where they want to work, but ultimately finding a job. I think that's one great way that people can give back to this community, is just engaging with them. Obviously, everybody knows that they can donate, but oftentimes you're hit with that, and not everybody has the money that they can give to organizations. So I think a little bit of your time, maybe mentoring someone on their resume, mentoring someone on how to interview for jobs. These things are extremely valuable to military service members who have never done it. For people like you who have done it many times in your life, it seems natural. But for them, they've never done that. So that can be very valuable to them.
Yeah, just a couple points I'd add to Brian's excellent points. One is, if you do donate, demand impact, right? It's not enough that an organization has great marketing or they say they've given a certain volume of service out. So what? Ask the question, so what? Don't feel guilty about it. It's amazing. It can be, a billionaire donor. It could be a large corporate donor. It could be an individual. It's amazing to me how few times people ask in any of the nonprofit work they do, what was the impact? So what? What happened because I made this donation? If an organization can't tell you that, you should not donate to them. The organizations that we fund on our website all have passed that test. They can all demonstrate impact literally on a daily basis to us. So that's the first thing I'd say. So think about impact before you donate. Second thing is to Brian's point on mentorship. One of the best things you can do to help a veteran is provide them with some mentorship. There's a great organization called American Corporate Partners here out of New York that does that. They connect corporate employees with veterans who are looking for business mentors. It's a great organization. And if you don't come from a top tier college, or you don't have family members in an industry or in a business, it's really hard actually to develop a network and break in. So it's a great way you can have some real tangible help in that regard. And the last thing I'll say is, if you're an employee of a company or an institution, ask someone in HR, ask the head of HR, ask the head of recruiting, how many vets are in the company? I will guarantee you 4 out of 5 times companies don't know that. By just asking that question, how many vets do we have? And them trying to answer it, it will open up possibilities. So we'll say, gee, we don't know, but we'll find out. Oh, it turns out we have 50. Maybe we should put together an employee affinity group, which would help with furthering their retention and our future recruiting. Or ask your company suppliers, how many vets do you hire? If a customer cares, that supplier might do something about it. And a lot of times when we've asked the question at Activision Blizzard, the suppliers come back, gee, we don't have a lot. How could we hire some vets? And of course, we have some great answers for that. So those are a couple suggestions about what you can do.
Are there any other questions?
Yep.
Hi, guys. Thank you so much for being here. So I know your goal is to place 25,000 vets by 2018. So I was just wondering, what are your plans after that?
Sure. Well, for now, we're laser focused on that 25,000 number. I don't know yet, to answer your question. We've been so focused on trying to get that right over the next 3 years that we haven't given a ton of thought to it. I want to be in a place where I can know for sure we're going to get there and hopefully get past it. But, I think in terms of being on the right issue, if you want to help veterans, an issue that makes, as we said earlier, resolving an issue that makes so many other challenges much better is employment. So we think we're on the right issue. We think for now 25,000 is an ambitious goal, but the right goal, and we think we're going to get there. But we'll let you know when we figure out what comes next.
Most likely they'll just place more.
Yes, sir.
I have 2 questions from Periscope. The first question is, how can a veteran who is maybe already out that somehow missed the opportunity to be involved with this program, possibly get involved with the program? And also, do you feel that it's harder to place, which is harder to place, female veterans or male veterans, or is there even a number difference or anything like that?
I'll start, and I think the General and Brian might want to weigh in. First of all, we help all veterans. And it's not the endowment that does the work, it's our grantees like Hire Heroes USA. But they help all veterans. One of the things we're particularly proud of is 15% of the military population are women, current military population. 25% of the veterans who've been helped by our grantees are women. So we're, in a disproportionate way, helping women veterans. Also, we help veterans of any era. So it doesn't matter if they're Korean War, Vietnam, Gulf, whatever, we're there to help them. That said, our main focus is post 9/11 vets because we think they need the most help. And we also feel that if we get them right, if we get them in meaningful work early on, they have so much runway ahead of them to do great things.
Did you want, the first part of your question was how does a veteran who kind of fell through the crack get back in? Brian, do you want to take that?
Absolutely. So for us, it's simple. They can go to hireheroesusa.org and they can register immediately, and they'll then be assigned to someone on my staff. And it's HIRE, heroesusa.org. And everything we do is personalized. So every person on my staff gets assigned a certain number of veterans every single Monday, and then they track. Everything is tracked through Salesforce so that not only can we hold ourselves accountable, but I can hold my individual staff accountable, and we can hold the service member accountable as well. If we've called them 3 or 4 times, they're not picking up the phone, we've sent them the resume revisions, and they're not staying active, they're not staying on top of their transition, or they're not being prudent enough in their search for a job, we can message them that. And so 85% of Hires USA is service members and veterans and spouses. And so we can speak to our clientele a little differently than other people. We get very real and make sure that they understand the truth, and that if they're lackadaisical in their approach to finding work, it could be a very long and lonely road that they're headed down. But they can find help immediately in that realm. In terms of the female veterans, no, I have not found it difficult at all. In fact, I've hired several female veterans on staff at Hire Heroes USA, and they're some of my best performers. So that hasn't been a barrier whatsoever. I think the biggest barrier for placement is attitude. I tell my staff all the time, we call them veteran transition specialists, but I tell them all the time, you are attitude ambassadors. Every service member you talk to on the phone in that initial assessment is going to have a different set of obstacles. And a lot of times, how we overcome those obstacles, doesn't matter who you are in life, is based on your attitude. If you've got a positive can-do attitude, you can accomplish anything. If you've got the attitude of a victim, then most likely you will stay a victim and you'll always be on the losing side of things. So that is one of the biggest things that we try to do immediately, is adjust that attitude, because a person with a positive attitude, they can go on to get just about any job, because a lot of employers will take a risk and hire someone for attitude and train them for skill. Vice, getting someone who's got great skill and a poor attitude.
If I could just add something to that. This is where Hollywood does us a little bit of a disservice by portraying the veteran in ways that probably are good entertainment, but factually are completely wrong about what veterans are. The first thing I would like to point out is that less than 25% of all young men and women who apply to join the armed forces get accepted. Most of them, between 95% or more, are all high school graduates. Absolutely no police record whatsoever, no drugs, the smallest thing can be disqualifying. So at the outset, you have an all-volunteer force, and they're all volunteers, by the way. Nobody forces them to join the military. So they put their lives on the line for the last decade in 2 separate wars. They acquitted themselves magnificently. And on the way out, they are even better than they were on the way in terms of understanding things like responsibility, loyalty, dedication, leadership, being able to make decisions under pressure, and so on and so forth. These are fantastic people. We talk about the greatest generation of the World War II fame. I believe that this generation is the greatest generation of the 21st century. We're going to need that generation. They're going to need to have jobs. They're going to need to be employed so they can shine and rise to the full level of their potential. They are wonderful human beings. And prospective employers out there need to really understand what they've gone through to get to where they are. And all they need is for 2 things. One is for employers to give a head nod to their companies that this is something we want to do, and for the government side to put as much effort into separating these people so they can rejoin society as they did in recruiting them and training them. And I think if you bridge that gap, there's no limit to what we can do.
It's fantastic, and we appreciate each of your questions. For more information, you can visit callofdutyendowment.org, where you'll find information about Hire Heroes as well as other Seal of Distinction recipients. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you for all your efforts.